were going to go on a crusade across the nation and try to do away with the homosexuals. And
Security agent. No, let him stay.
No.
Let him stay.
Well, at least it's a fruit pie.
Hey there. One of the greatest moments in LGBT rights history, honestly.
This fruit pie is quite happy about that.
In honor of that wonderful moment, we've brought our banana cream pies. We hope that all of those joining us have as well. Welcome. I'm going to pop us over in other directions there. There we go. That way we're in alphabetical order. How are you, Lolo?
You know, after that video, I'm a little better. I'm going to be honest.
Well, happy Transgender Day of Visibility to you.
And you as well.
Thank you. So to all of our trans siblings, friends, all of that, we definitely are excited for everything that you guys have going on in the positivity and the positive directions. We know that things kind of suck sometimes, but at least for today, we're going to be saying we're stoked on you. Happy that you're here and that you're you. And so we have an interesting conversation today, something that's very light, very easy, and
very laid back, cliff notes.
Very laid back and relaxed. There's nothing really to it. It's pretty straightforward. But we're going to be talking about gender in Mormonism.
Great. Sorry, we're good. Carry on. I'm a professional doing professional things.
Yeah.
Go on.
So with this conversation, because there's so much like interconnection with the LGBT rights movement, there's going to be a lot of conversation about LGBTQ plus issues. But I really did want to focus on gender more broadly speaking, especially women's position in the church. And
I'm very interested in the position of women. All of the positions.
We've had kind of an interesting week in terms of the discussion around women's rights and women's
agreed.
What women's places in the church this last week because of some comments that kind of came up during the general women's meeting. I've been a lot of podcasts on that, and honestly, like if you haven't seen the Panel on Mormon Stories podcast, or I think that Rebecca and Landon had a conversation about it, Mormonish, just these other places where that's come up. If you haven't seen those conversations, Zelf on the Shelf had a pretty long conversation on it too that I thought was really good.
I watched that one.
Yeah, it was really good. Samantha Shelley, like you know, we stand Samantha and Tanner here.
Can't go wrong there.
I actually was at BYU Idaho at the same time as them. I didn't know them at all, but they were doing their whole thing with I think they were doing the squirrel at the time, and I was there when they were doing that.
No way.
So kind of fun.
You were already cool to me, but not gonna lie.
Like I said, I didn't know them, right? They were in completely
different matter.
Never actually crossed paths with them, but yeah.
You shared air.
Shared air. There was an interesting little crop of kind of the fledgling ex-Mormon podcasters and YouTubers and all of that kind of came out from that BYU Idaho period. Gerardo Savano was also there, like I think right at the tail end of my time.
Really?
Like I think it started right as I was leaving. I'm not sure if we actually had any overlap. We may have just missed each other by a semester. Anyway, that is a huge digression.
No, that's fascinating. I knew 0.0% of this, so I'm enjoying this. Carry on.
Let's talk a little bit about one of the easiest, just the simplest, most straightforward subjects in all of Mormonism. And let's talk about polygamy.
It would be simple and straightforward if those women would learn their place. I think I'm a little crooked.
Yeah. You know, polygamy, the thing that is in no way controversial. There is just everyone is happy.
Love it.
Yeah.
Just smiling and our many braids and large bangs.
So normally when we talk about polygamy, we talk about like how bad it was and how like Brigham Young was a friggin' like monster when he was practicing it. Warren Jeffs today is just also in no uncertain terms also a monster. And you know, we could talk about the exploitation of women in under Joseph Smith's practice of polygamy and all that, but we are not going to dive into that today. What we are going to talk about instead is the role that these polygamous women played in the women's suffrage movement, both in Utah and on the national stage. So in 1870, there was this bill that was going up in front of Congress that would have outlawed polygamy. And women in the Utah Territory were able to vote. They were enfranchised in that territory. And they took some action to protest this anti-polygamy bill, and they helped to actually defeat it. They helped to keep it from actually getting passed. And they played a rather pivotal role in that. And this was a pretty big deal because women at the time in politics it really wasn't too much of a thing.
Yeah, I was going to say there wasn't women in politics. Yeah, that wasn't.
You know, you kind of always have like some degree of women playing a role in politics.
Right.
And
like Mike Pence's mother. She's a big one.
Yeah.
Can't forget her.
You know, like we definitely can't like understate the role of women in like the Underground Railroad and these other movements and all of that. But on kind of this like national stage of really having a systematized voice, women really were relegated to a certain role, and that was to silent servitude. But in Utah, they were actually able to use their collective power to oppose or to really oppose those structures and to find a certain voice for themselves. It's kind of ironic that such an exploitative system as Mormon polygamy served to give women a basis for having power for themselves. Is really kind of one of those peculiar ironies of history that you wouldn't expect. But in 1887, the Emmons-Tucker Act passes through Congress, and that has the effect of not just disenfranchising polygamous women in Utah, but all women in the Utah Territory. But in 1896, when they actually passed the Utah State Constitution, women's suffrage, women's enfranchisement is included in that Constitution. It passes all right, and so Utah becomes one of only a few states where women are allowed to vote in 1896. Which is interesting because
I was going to say that is interesting.
Here we have Mormonism on the bleeding edge of women's suffrage and gender rights, which is pretty cool. So I want to make sure to emphasize that at the start, or rather at the end of the 19th century here, as we're coming into the 20th century, as we're just beginning this discussion here, Mormonism is kind of on the front end for the time of women's rights in a weird way. Mind you, there were like still major issues, but
what issues, Perry? What issues?
We can't understate the impact of World War II on women's rights and women's recognition. But before that, just the women's suffrage movement was
well, and you got to think
a
lot of the wives of the apostles, I mean, pretty early bedtime. School was the next day, so
some of them were quite a bit younger. So some of the, they had time. Like that was one of the things that they had time. So when the national women's suffrage movement is getting its rolling and is working towards getting the passage of the 19th Amendment, Utah women were playing a role in this because they were already enfranchised. But they were also kind of treated like the log cabin Republicans are to the GOP, where the women's suffrage movement did not really trust these Utah women. And honestly, kind of rightly so, because what Utah women were wanting to use that right to vote for was ultimately to a lot of stuff that is today quite regressive, and
Right.
kind of would have been regressive then as well. It's messy. The way that we'll see it in other places, the way that women are used by the church for certain political movements ends up kind of on the surface looking like it's benevolent towards women, but it actually ends up being pretty regressive.
Right. I know when we were. Sorry.
No, please.
We were. Did I freeze? Oh, there we go. I know when we were looking to join the church, my mother was very, very, very feminist, big time. And it surprised me looking at this through the lens of somebody who is now significantly older than when we joined the church. I see it for what it was. It was a pretty propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we were talking in the pregame, women are so sacred. Women are so important that we can't even talk about it. We love them so much that we're not even going to acknowledge them because they are so far above us. So we're going to keep them in the home and safe and pregnant, barefoot in the kitchen, and home and safe because they're so important.
Yeah.
And at the time I thought, wow, how progressive is that coming from a Southern Baptist,
sure,
you know, background. But looking at it now, I'm like, well, what a beautiful gilded cage we signed ourselves up for.
Yep.
And this isn't me at all taking a bite of this pie ahead of time because it looks good.
No, we're going after our pies. By the way, if you're in the audience and do not have a banana cream pie, well, that's what we're doing here today to celebrate our remembrance of one of the most notorious homophobes in history getting a lovely taste of banana cream pie live on TV. Yeah, no, you're quite right. And at the end of the 19th century, when women in Mormonism have kind of a progressive end of rights, it's still in this it's in this broader milieu that already has that idea that women have a certain place, a certain role that they're supposed to perform. That's just commonly accepted. And
Yay, Mormon atheists!
Thank you, Mormon atheists, for joining the the pie competition, or the pie enjoyment here. As long as it is a fruit pie. I got to give credit to Anita Bryant. Like, she was an absolute monster, an absolute homophobe, but
terrible,
very, very, very quick to respond the way that she did. Like, credit where credit is due. But yeah, so I mean, as we're going to roll forward in this narrative, we'll see that through line of kind of this benevolent patriarchy is going to be playing a prominent part of the narrative.
Stockholm syndrome, what?
Right.
I'm sorry. What?
So
I we love you, Mormon atheists. You're awesome.
We do love you. Well. We love having you here, Mormon atheists. Thank you. So I wanted the title of this slide to sound, kind of like a long kind of "We didn't start the fire," but it's kind of hard to do that with too many Mormon names. Joe McCarthy, Ezra Benson. Okay.
Great. Now that song is going to be in my head for the next 3 days.
It's the equivalent of Rickrolling you with
God bless America so we don't get flagged for bad words.
I think we're almost deep enough into the live stream that we can get away with it.
Because that is not what I was going to say.
We're also not monetized yet. We are so far from monetization.
No, I know, but I mean, still, I didn't want to
I mark all these as not for kids as well. So,
even though I am basically an 8-year-old, but okay.
So the World War II.
Way to bring it down,
right. World War II. The end of that war brought in this fear of communism, And that was really spearheaded by like McCarthyism and the Red Scare, and that just dominated American politics at the end of World War II. And so you get these other far right movements like the Birch Society that really take it to a whole other extreme. And tied in with the Red Scare is what's known as the Lavender Scare. And so where you have like communists in every corner, well, one of those ways that you can see a communist in every corner is that you also have the homosexual everywhere in the State Department and all that. And that is your ironically closeted communist that is going to destroy the fabric of American society.
I have a story. And I am not trying to tangent, but this is a tangent. So my great grandmother, God rest her soul, wherever she ended up. So this lovely pair of gentlemen moved in down the street. Very much along the same vein of in history, just gals being pals, right? Okay, these guys, I mean, just obviously. And so my great grandmother was sitting there talking to us, and my brother goes, "Hey, have you met your neighbors?" And my great grandma goes, "Yes, and I think they are homosexuals." And I'm old. I'm 16, and I'm like, "Why are you whispering? Do they not know? Do we need to tell them?
They might be shocked and surprised to hear.
Right? I think they're homosexuals." And my mom goes, "What makes you think that?" She goes, "Have you seen their yard? It's immaculate. I can never get my plants to do that." I'm like, what?
Well,
That's what you're basing it on? Not the fact that these are the two best dressed men Grand Prairie, Texas has ever seen. They have a dog named Buffy, and they hold hands 24/7. What gave it away? The plants.
I think, well, I mean,
obviously
the hand holding is only a sign that they're just good roommates.
Besties.
Besties,
Clearly.
Yeah.
It's her.
But
It's the begonias, not the hand holding, that gave
but there
it away.
is no way that two straight best friends would be able to keep a garden that immaculate.
You should have seen it, Perry. The flowers were beautiful. And I just, anytime I hear the word homosexual, I think they're homosexuals. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're
inside. We're in your house, inside of your house, in the dining room. They can't hear you, Granny. We're good. Oh, God. I don't know if any of my family watches this. If so, y'all were there. You know it happened. Come on.
If our viewership numbers are anything to go off of.
Okay. I'm done tangenting. I'm back to my pie.
Yeah, let's get back to Joe McCarthy hating the homosexuals.
Teach us things.
Yeah. So it's kind of funny to me as somebody who has worked for the U.S. government that this was such a major issue in the 50s. This would have cost me my job in the 1950s. And now I kind of am able to sit at my desk with a pride flag. And I kind of just don't care, what anybody thinks about it. We've come a long way. But yeah, McCarthyism
sound like one of them homosexuals.
Right. McCarthyism was obviously incredibly stupid. And it was paired up pretty well with the equally, if not even more stupid, Bircherism. And Mark Peterson and Ezra Benson and some other far-right Mormon leaders really got wrapped up in Bircherism. And Ezra Benson, who Ezra Benson is part of Dwight Eisenhower's cabinet. He is the Secretary of Agriculture, right? Like, big deal, very controversial figure in Dwight Eisenhower's cabinet. But Dwight believed in Ezra Benson. like stood by him through thick and thin.
Wow.
But later on, Ezra Benson goes on and accuses his boss here of being a secret communist, because he's so wrapped up in Bircherism. Like the man, Dwight Eisenhower was fine. He warned against the military-industrial complex, and I agree with him. And he also created the interstate highway system, which was a great infrastructure project, honestly.
Agreed.
Ezra Benson, on the other hand, not the sharpest tool in the shed, and has actually created some significant doctrinal problems for Mormonism that once I start to untangle, oh boy, when
I haven't gotten to that point in my. I started and I can't.
For all of this, I really highly recommend Dr. Matthew Harris's book, Watchman on the Tower, that deals with how how Ezra Benson became radicalized, as well as his podcasts.
Will you message me that?
Yeah, so he was on Mormon Stories, which is where I first saw him, and then I think he's done a few others.
I assume you don't mean Ezra Taft Benson.
No, Ezra Benson was too dead.
Ezra Benson.
Mormon Stories. Sorry. I am pejoratively not using the middle initial or the middle name. I at this point in time, just referring to him as calling him Mark Peterson instead of Mark E. Peterson is my way of kind of casually slapping back.
It's fair. It's fair.
It's anyway. This is my way of kind of getting back at them. So yeah, Ezra Benson instead of Ezra Taft Benson, Ezra Benson here. He was not very bright, honestly, or rather, he was actually decently intelligent. It was just that he was so easily wrapped up in these radical far right ideas that he just went nuts. He would have been all over Trump. He probably would have made Trump seem sane, honestly. Would have just loved Donald Trump. Yeah, Ezra Benson, very special guy who has kind of ruined Utah Mormon politics, if I'm being perfectly candid.
No, you're being honest.
Yeah. What he does though is he nestles this whole fear of communism and the lavender scare ideas and wraps it up into Mormonism in such a way that Mormonism goes from being kind of a benevolent and accepting doctrine or religion, so long as you're not black,
the evil we know,
into being just wholly intolerant of really any sort of progressive or civil rights idea.
Wait. Were you far enough in? Oh wait, I want to show you my shirt.
Okay. Yeah.
And I feel like that's poignant with what you're saying.
I feel like Ezra Benson needed to see that from day one.
Sorry, that just reminded me.
Somehow the guy goes to war ravaged Germany. He sees the consequences of the war, of fascism and all of that, and he's like, I think that communism really sucks, and also now I don't like gay people.
Germany has that effect on people, though, I'm told.
Yeah. Ezra Benson, my dude, what you should have taken from that is maybe we should be nice to each other, but and that Nazism was the problem, but no, communism was the issue.
Don't be a radical crazy person.
So in 1965, as Benson stands in front of the John Birch Society, and he gives this really long speech. And in that speech, he refers multiple times to his position and calling as an apostle in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He invokes that position, that special calling, several times. And I want to be clear, his support of the Birch Society was controversial. It was controversial within the leadership of the church.
That was going to be my question. Yeah. How controversial?
Extremely, right? This is not something that's just out and out accepted. They push back on him multiple times.
Okay.
They send him on special missions. They're not accepting this Bircherism thing. However, he is able to invoke that position, and he does it, and he ultimately becomes the president of the church. He has an outsized impact ultimately in the long run. By the time he became president of the church, his views were pretty tempered. Hinckley and
Or he
Monson
just
really kind of
had been taught not to say it out loud as much, you know?
I think it's more like Hinckley and Monson really kind of kept him on a leash and kind of kept him quiet and all of that as much as they possibly could. And they let him do his kind of conspiracy nonsense about the Book of Mormon. And that was it. You can talk about Gadiant robbers in every corner if you want to. Like, that's fine. Talk about the Book of Mormon being a little history. We're cool with that. Just don't go off on communism. Like, it's weird. We don't like it. Part of the reason why this is an issue is because he calls the civil rights movement, the Black civil rights movement, a communist plot.
Which obviously
is,
that's true.
Pretty heinous, all things considered.
Yes! Oh my God!
But this idea is not necessarily out of left field. Let's not forget that the FBI was investigating Martin Luther King as a secret communist agent and all of that. Like, it's not.
Isn't this the same organization that eventually, like, thought that John Lennon was also a massive? Just say, maybe don't listen to them about who's a spy. But you and I, and to make a point there, I mean, I'm not just randomly. When we were pre-gaming, we had discussed how, and I am not nearly as well versed as you, that prophets, apostles, it is very much, we are taught that they are the prophet and apostle, not for the active and non-active Mormons, but for the entire world.
Correct.
And you were saying that in this situation, the church is like, oh, he wasn't talking on our behalf, but then also, doesn't it say in the scriptures that, or in our doctrine, that should a prophet or apostle do something that would be against the church, God would remove them from their position in the church?
Yeah. One of the things I forgot to mention in the pregame, interestingly enough, is that Ezra Benson kind of promoted that idea. He's the one that gives the 14 fundamentals of following the prophet. He's the one who is doing all of that stuff, right? So like just before he would have become president of the church, he gives the 14 fundamentals of following the prophet speech at BYU, which was wildly controversial at the time, but it's now like this
in
mainstay,
the church,
among the brethren and like all of that, like just
okay.
But is now like accepted in the body of the church. It's just like, yeah, it's just this thing, right? Like,
totally
the prophet's
not
more
weird
important
at
than a dead
all.
prophet, and like all of that. Like, yeah. He was an interesting figure in all of this. But he embeds these lavender scare ideas that are, and red scare ideas into Mormonism, into the heart of Mormonism. And because his particular group wins the day essentially in taking over or taking power of over Mormonism, though ultimately what wins out is a tempered version of that thing, like it's just baked in. It's so baked into the fabric of Mormonism at this point in time. It would be very difficult to separate out, women's rights and LGBT rights and preserve like what is modern Mormonism. And that's become a huge problem. That's really where this is kind of leading. This is why we're going through this, is because Ezra Benson, Mark Peterson, they are creating the stage for this, where you have like Hugh B. Brown and other more the intellectual leaders that are opposing that. They don't win the day, right? Like, we don't have like Hugh B. Brown's ideas really anywhere in modern Mormonism.
You don't hear about him.
You don't. I mean, the guy was proposing that basically every general authority should go into emeritus status at the age of 75, which would have removed him from his position. And I'm like, honestly, I wish that Hugh B. Brown had won the day, because the Mormon church would be better for it.
I think that anytime you have old people in power, i.e. leadership of the church, leadership of a country, maybe these people, I mean, there is an age of retirement for a reason. I'm not saying that we need to put all old people on an island and feed them once a month. I'm just saying maybe.
I think maybe Futurama was onto something though, with putting really old people in.
Thank you. We're same page, Barry. Same page.
No, I I think that there is a benefit. There's obviously benefit to obtaining the wisdom from those who have like more life experience and all of that. But there's also
Sure.
something to be said for having leadership from people who are actually invested in the future, who are going to be directly impacted by like the consequences of the things that they decide to do.
Well, and maybe people that are young enough to understand the society and the society's issues that they are living in.
Right.
I mean, I love my family, but my grandfather still prays to the Saint Ronald Reagan. So, I mean, he's super out of touch. And so I don't have to worry about him seeing this podcast. But I'm just saying, if you're that out of touch with what's happening in the world around you, should you really be making those decisions?
Right. And when you think
Even
about
if
like
you don't give two squats about the future.
when you think about the modern church and how Dallin Oaks and Russell Nelson have responded to some of these movements that have come up, LGBT rights, women's rights in the church, the ordained women movement, and all of that, and how just really pathetic their responses are, and how much they just miss the point of what's going on. It shows that separation, because when what they are responding to is not the point that's really being raised. Or they say that they understand or that they care, that they have all this compassion, but they don't recognize that like what they're doing is causing the harm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're
And
literally pouring kerosene on a fire going, I don't see the issue.
Yeah. And well, I think that Dallin Oaks is probably malicious, and honestly, probably Russell Nelson. I don't think that Jeffrey Holland is. I think Jeffrey Holland's just old and doesn't really understand the point, right?
Right. So we don't have to
like-
worry about him seeing this podcast
So-
either.
Right. So when Jeffrey Holland gives his musket fire talk at BYU, which is a horrible talk, like I
forgot about that.
I don't think
talk.
that was necessarily malicious. I think he legitimately does not understand why it was a problem.
Yeah.
Personally, I think that he just does not understand why that talk was an issue.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the issue. That's kind of
I was gonna say
the problem, right?
Proving our point.
So this evolution of going from a more, at least in terms of gender, being a more progressive literalist church into a very like stagnant or regressive church really hits the fan when the Equal Rights Amendment rolls around. Because
those black
the
people
church
stirring stuff up.
Well, it's not the civil rights movement, right? It's not black people and their search for it. It's Congress trying to say, hey, like along gender lines, maybe we shouldn't actually have any discrimination being allowed. Okay, let's pass that now. And as that's going down the states, it passes through 34 states, I believe, and then it hits Utah. And it's not like this is in a sequence and it needs to go through a line. It's just like Utah's turn comes up to address this. And Utahns, by and large, are like, they're pretty compassionate people. Like Mormons are raised to be understanding, compassionate people who want people to be treated fairly and equitably. That's how we're culturally brought up. And when this is the thing that leads a lot of us that are kind of more, liberal thinkers in the church out of Mormonism, is because we're like, hey, we're going to put this compassion thing that you're talking about actually to the test. We're going to work it.
Right.
And now what you're saying is incompatible with this value that you brought me up to hold.
It's from you, Dad. I learned it from watching you.
That's seriously, for me, is like the thing that brought me out of Mormonism was losing my orthodoxy because of like, well, if they're going to be like this, clearly they're not directly inspired.
Right.
The ERA is one of the.
There should not be one homeless person in Utah.
There should not be, especially with all the wealth that the church has.
And you and I have discussed that. Like you've made that point to me so many times. And the more and the more and the more that I look and see, it's like Yzma. Well, you should have thought of that before you became, what is it? Peasants? Or what does he want? Food?
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah. It's that is where I'm landing with Mormonism, is not that with modern Mormonism, with the modern Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it's not that I disagree necessarily. Like I do disagree, obviously, with like how they're using their money or whatever, and like they can use their money however they want. That's fine. Blah blah blah. But I can disagree with that. It's that the way that they are using their money is immoral. Because as long as there is a single person who is homeless and on the street, in Utah, when you can fix that, like, yeah, you've got an issue. If you're building one more temple while there's still another homeless person, you're doing it wrong. If you're changing city ordinances so that way you can get your temples built, thank you for Mormonish for talking about all of those issues. If you're changing city ordinances so you can get your temples built, but there is a homeless person in your area of influence, that's immoral.
Doesn't that sound like the great and spacious building that we've been taught is so bad?
Right. And all the fine apparel that you're supposed to wear to go in and all that. Anyway. Okay. So yeah, it's modern Mormonism. Gotta love it. So when the ERA hits Utah, at first it enjoys like popular support, but the church gets these movements around to oppose it because one of the things that they're afraid of is this growing LGBT rights movement. So you've just had Stonewall, right, just the year before, and this gay rights movement is actually starting to take on a life of its own. And they're worried about that. And so one of the common talking points that arises out of these sort of evangelical circles is this idea that passing the Equal Rights Amendment would create single-sex bathrooms, which it's funny to me that the ERA gets opposed on the basis of like bathroom use issues. And what are we using to oppose trans rights today?
I was going to say, boy,
Like,
howdy.
are we using the same
repeating.
stupid debunked arguments from like 1970s, right? The same thing that you used to keep women like. Anyway, we're gonna go over that multiple times in this. It drives me nuts though to just like when you go back and you study like these like the opposition to civil rights movements and you see the same issues repeated over and over and over again. It's just like these are dumb arguments. They've been shown to be dumb multiple times, and all you're doing is repeating them. And then you find out they're basically like all Nazi talking points as well, and that's a whole thing.
It's like,
like it's frustrating.
Guys, if you are quoting and using the same justification as Adolf F. Hitler, maybe.
Yeah.
Just saying.
And that's honestly
maybe
like,
check it.
Yeah. So Utah's not the only state that ends up opposing the ERA. Like obviously, like it needed 38 states to be ratified, and Utah's only one of those. You know, more than 12 states that didn't ultimately ratify it. However, its failure in Utah was a significant blow because it was kind of expected that it would pass through Utah okay, because Mormons are generally good people who ostensibly support the rights of everybody as long as your skin is the right color.
I was trying to see how you were going to do that. I was like, okay, I'm down.
Yeah.
Let me see how he gets this.
Yeah, it's I mean, deeply racist. Like there are some deep racism issues. But when it comes to like gender, it's that wasn't as much the situation.
Yeah.
Until you can tie in the lavender scare politics and this fear of LGBT people.
Okay.
And this is what they do. They start to define, they use these ideas from the ERA to weaponize fear of LGBT people. And this also helps them to really try and stratify gender lines. Because in the 50s, right, you have this idea of like the mother's in the home, she supports the family and all that. But as the 70s are rolling along, there's more and more of this.
Women are getting jobs.
Right. Women are getting jobs. You got third wave feminism at that point in time, rolling along and doing its thing. And like this is scaring the church leaders, and they are losing. They know they are losing on the civil rights side for Black people. And like this issue in like Brazil that's just starting to kind of develop, and they are it's a whole thing. And they're gonna start to see like other similar evangelical churches really lose on Black civil rights. And that's going to scare them even more. We'll get into that. We'll loop back around to that. But in 1995, you've got the Bear case in Hawaii, right? And that's going to just dominate headlines. And the church is trying to actually talk in that case because this is the first time that like gay marriage has come up before a court. And it's gone back and forth between like trial courts and this whole thing. The engagement by, I'll put the name in the show notes after this, but The Engagement is the title of the book that I read that deals with like basically how we go from the Bear case up to Obergefell v. Hodges. and how like the support for LGBT rights shifted in the U.S. and the role that the LDS Church played in all of that. But the church was denied standing in the Bear case because they weren't able to demonstrate to the court that they actually had like a theological or religious position that would be impacted by the outcome of that finding. And this was actually really common, like among like other evangelical churches to run into this issue. And they released documents that are similar to the Family Proclamation to get around that. But they wanted that standing. So in September of 1995, they released what is now known as the Family Proclamation during the General Women's Meeting. It's interesting that they released the General Women's Meeting.
This was the 1 year, almost to the day anniversary of my family joining the church. The proclamation came out.
I was really young at the time, so it was like always kind of a part of my life, basically.
Okay, so I'm really old. I get it. Thanks, Perry.
No, it's just one of those things. That's like I don't remember Mormonism without it. Like to me, like growing up, this seemed like it was just part of the doctrine, and people would talk about like, oh, when they released it, it seemed like it was just this like, oh, whatever thing. But now that Prop 22 is coming up in California, look at how prophetic they were. So 2000 Prop 22 was basically the first time that the state of California was voting on gay marriage, and that screwed me up as a kid, realizing my own LGBT identity. Anyway,
so what? Let me, and this is on a personal note. So let me totally ask this to you on a live stream. How? You don't have to give me exact numbers. How old were you at this point? Because I turned 15 in 95.
I was in primary.
Okay, so you're just kidding.
Remember when I was on my mission, and do the math.
No, dude, I can barely. I was sitting here the other day trying to figure out how long it had been, and I was like, well, when you came back to visit, George was an infant.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I had just gotten home from my mission at that point.
Yeah.
And
he's older now.
He's older now.
A little bit older. I guess I forget how old I am.
Yeah.
Thanks for that constant reminder.
You're welcome. That's what I'm here for.
Carry on. Teach us things. Now that I've gotten us off topic again.
So the first counselor in the Relief Society gave some comments to the Salt Lake Tribune. There was an article back in 2015 published by Peggy Fletcher Stack titled "After 20 Years, Mormonism's Family Proclamation is quoted, praised, parsed, and politics," and she quotes the first counselor in the Relief Society as, and this was Chieko Kazaki, as basically saying that like they were never consulted in the release of this statement from the church. So Gordon Hinckley just shows
shocking to me.
Right. So Gordon Hinckley just shows up, basically hijacks the General Women's Meeting, doesn't mention that he's releasing this statement, does it in September before the General Conference of the Church, and releases this Family Proclamation document. Now, why would he do it in September before like the General Conference that would have been happening like the next week?
Because he was overcome with Jesus' power.
It needed to happen in the General Women's Meeting, right? For some reason. Well, actually,
in Relief Society, they were super stoked about it. I remember them talking. Let me, of course, say this right as I shove pie in my mouth. They were talking about how it was released at the women's conference because women are so close to God and so spiritual that was a safe place for such important doctrine to be shared.
Right. The benevolent patriarchy idea kicking in.
Mm-hmm.
What it actually was the deadline for being able to submit for like standing to be able to give an amicus brief to the court in the Bear case was like before the General Conference. And so they needed to release this statement so that way they could actually like file their their case, and it needed to appear in front of like a general membership meeting like this to show that like, no, it's not just like some local thing that we're worried about with this. It's the entire body politic.
It's for everybody. Yeah.
It's for everybody. It's this general statement. It's to the world, right? A proclamation to the world. Like this is the whole thing that they're trying to kind of do with this, to try and get this standing in front of the court so they can give this. It ultimately like it fails on some procedural grounds, or like it doesn't work out
because it was stupid.
Well, there's that, but the Bear case ultimately doesn't actually accept their statement. It's on some procedural technicality that the nature of the case shifted by October, and so they weren't able to submit. But yeah, that was the reason why they did it then, was to try and get standing in that case. Wild.
And the more so, my dog has something to say about it too.
I agree.
Oh yeah, he's pissed. So Joe's trying. He's like, stop. So here's my question to this. And I don't even know the answer, being somebody who is fresh from drinking the Kool-Aid. How did I not see more of this? Was I so willfully blind, or does the church just do a really good job of don't look at the man behind the curtain, you know?
Well, I mean, it's pretty endemic that the church is just really good at don't look at the man behind the curtain. At least they were before the internet, right?
Well, that's true. Boy, howdy, yeah, that's a...
When you were taught about this at church, because this is what I was taught about it at church, and I was taught about it in some pretty public meetings, so I'm quite certain that this is how you were taught about it.
I'm sure.
This was one of those things that in September of 1995 wasn't a big deal. Nobody was talking about this issue. Everybody knew that this is what a family was supposed to be like.
Right.
But you know, the prophets, they're prophets, and they saw what was coming. They had this revelation, and they knew what was coming, and so they made this statement.
Power.
Right, they made this statement so that way that, you know, we would know where we as true Christians stand on the issue of the family. Because those gays, they're going to be coming after the family. They're going to be coming after the temple. They're going to try and destroy it, and all of that. And they're going to try and destroy our religious freedom. And the way they're going to do that is by taking down the family, because that's Satan's plan, is to destroy the family.
Clear.
And so we needed to have this statement issued.
I think I got the wrong gay agenda, because I read that we were taking down Oprah this year.
Oh,
so
really?
I didn't even know we were supposed to be taking down the church. I think that's ridiculous.
I mean, nobody ever sent me my agenda.
Oh, you didn't register.
I've been kind of winging it.
You've been doing a great job.
So here's the thing. It's weird that the church is so afraid of LGBT people. Yes. To this day, the church is afraid of LGBT people, and they don't know how to handle it. And it's weird that that's the case. And it's pretty apparent when you look at like how they handled the ERA and how they tied in LGBT rights into that and all that they are afraid on this issue. And you know, they were losing on race in 1978. And I want to be like a pretty fair critic in this particular situation. So there's this idea that, well, what the church was afraid of was that they were going to lose the tax exempt status, and that they were going to get sued into oblivion and all this stuff, and that BYU was going to lose all this money. Heard. And this is not unfair, right? So Bob Jones University, which was very similar to BYU at the time, was getting sued into oblivion and was losing in the courts and was going to lose its tax exempt status and all that. So it's not unfair to say that. However, I don't actually think that it was the primary motivator,
right,
for the change here. What I think the primary motivator was when they got to Brazil, they could no longer do this, not one drop policy of African blood. It just did not work in Brazil, because race is a construct. It doesn't actually make any sense when you put it into real, actual, practical application. We just use it as a stupid social construct. There are some people who follow it in ways that make sense, and other people who don't. And you do with it what you do with it, and you really shouldn't be judging people on the basis of the social construct. It's just useful for understanding like kind of where people are coming from based off of life experiences because of how society is structured. That's what race is. That's it. But because they're trying to make it like this innate, almost eternal characteristic, right? From the really not necessarily eternal, because everybody's going to be white in the celestial
I was
kingdom.
going to say, wait a minute. I thought we all became beautiful and white.
Yeah, so messed up. Anyway, because like that was how they had this whole
87% of Salt Lake City. Carrying
on. Because that was how they had all this structured. And they arrive at Brazil, and now that no longer works because of it being a social construct that doesn't make sense when you apply it to Brazil. They needed to change. They needed a change in order for the church to continue functioning in Brazil. And Brazil was one of those growth economies at the time where the church was really sprouting up. So they needed it to change for that purpose. So they kicked Marky Peterson out of the country, and they voted on revoking the priesthood and temple ban. It passed. Marky Peterson came back. They announced it in general conference. Bada bing, bada bang. It's now official declaration too. All right. That was a little bit of a brief summary, but it is not in any way inaccurate.
I was going to say, but not wrong.
It's in no way, shape, or form inaccurate. That's exactly.
I feel like Marky Peterson came home and was like, who the hell was supposed to be in charge?
The man was so racist that the church had to kick him out of the country.
He's like, I was gone for 20 minutes. What happened?
But let's not forget that Bruce McConkie was a racist at that point in time. You have Ezra Taft Benson, who they fall in line. Yeah,
everyone was a racist.
They ultimately fall in line with Spencer Kimball, who was a huge homophobe. But they,
y'all are doing great, guys. Keep it up.
Miracle Forgiveness is one of the most homophobic texts out there.
Okay, so
it's disgustingly homophobic. Anyway,
Lolo's church court history. I was a bit of a. To quote my primary teacher, a chewed piece of bubble gum in my early 20s. It was a good time for me. And I enjoyed every moment. And when I came back to church and they made me read Miracle of Forgiveness.
Miracle of Forgiveness is a disgusting book. And
it made me a bigger hoe than I was before.
It's a disgusting text, and I do not support book burning as a principle. However, that book would make for excellent kindling. So anyway,
I'm not saying you're wrong.
I'm not saying I'm not advocating for it, but also
I mean, if it happened to fall while you were camping.
Yeah, exactly. If it just happens to fall into your fireplace while there's a fire going on, whoops. Horrible book. I'm really glad
trees had to die to make this thing.
I am really glad that Deseret Book has removed it from the shelves and it's no longer available. I think even digitally at this point. It's
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
what?
I think that
when did that happen?
A few years ago.
See, I should have. Why couldn't that have happened back when I was sinning?
It's getting shoved down the memory hole, and rightly so. It is a horrible text.
It really is. I was so traumatized. Oh God. Anyway.
So yeah.
Sorry.
So, as the church is just continuing to lose on these fronts, despite renowned homophobe Spencer Kimball finally allowing Black people to go to the temple and hold the priesthood, he keeps in place the priesthood ban on gender lines. And I think that this is really how we as critics need to discuss women's place in Mormonism, in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is that there is currently a gender priesthood ban. There is currently a priesthood ban on women, because that is objectively
except for weird naked temple time.
Except for weird naked temple time, but
But
it's still
that
officiated.
Doesn't count.
Now that's still under the keys and auspices of a temple president.
That's right. Okay, that's it's fair.
I mean, anyway, it's one of those where it's okay, there's this kind of stretch where you can call it There's them operating within the priesthood, but it's not really like officiating in the priesthood.
No, I'm just saying that's the church's response. Like anytime it's like, oh wait, but
what about
look
the
at
temple?
our token. Look at our token female priest right there.
Right.
Doing
but what about a like ward
female
council meeting? Like who's it that's talking?
Right.
Yeah, it's the thing.
Like they trot out their only time that women have the priesthood. And see, we're doing it.
So the issue is that if you accept LGBT people, because of the way that they have structured all this, if you accept LGBT people into full fellowship while presenting as LGBTQ, you would have to dissolve the priesthood ban on women.
Yeah.
And that is something that this benevolent patriarchy is not willing to do.
Nope.
And this is why they're afraid of LGBTQ people, why they're afraid of this issue, because it would necessitate changing the way that they do priesthood. So let's talk about the priesthood.
Let's.
You ready for this?
No, let's do it.
All right. So the priesthood, according to LDS teachings, is the power and authority of God to act in his name on earth. And it is gendered. It used to be racial. Now it's just gendered.
Yeah.
It's weird, right? Like, isn't that a weird thought to have, is that the power and authority to act in God's name is gendered?
That there's gatekeepers to it? Yeah.
It's weird, right? Like, God should be able to call whoever he wants into those positions, right? Why is, to put it bluntly, why is a penis necessary to officiate in the priesthood?
You've asked, yes, that's so many answers to that.
That is the necessary consequence, right?
Correct.
I mean, it used to be a penis and a lack of melanin,
right?
But now it's now your melanin quantities can be whatever.
We need you to have testicles and a sunburn to be able to go to play in our sandbox. Damn it!
There is not a single scripture in the LDS canon that justifies a gendered priesthood. There is not one passage of scripture that justifies this. I would defy someone to prove me wrong on that one.
You were talking about that. And so when that is brought up, what is the apologist response? You were saying it was the letter in Corinthians, correct?
So it's not in Corinthians where this comes up. It's one of the pastoral epistles. I don't remember which one. I think it's one of the Timothy's, 2 Timothy maybe, where
I thought it was in an entirely different part of the Bible. So you're doing better than me.
The author of that epistle, who was not Paul, contends that or says that women should basically keep silent in meetings, that they shouldn't speak in meetings, which is kind of contrary to something else that Paul says in Romans, at the end of Romans. I said Corinthians because I got it wrong. It's in Romans, where he gives a salutation to Junia, the female apostle, who was actually favored among the apostles.
Scandalous.
So you have a female apostle at the time of Paul. So in one of the letters that we know was written by Paul, he gives a salutation to a female apostle by name.
So how does the church get around that, I guess?
It's usually a tie back into tradition. I haven't actually heard a good apologetic on this.
I was going to say, have you heard anything that actually even kind of sort of was worth the air?
No. What I get usually is that God can decide who he wants to have his priesthood, and at this point in time, there's been no revelation given that shows that women can. It's basically what I get.
There has been shows they can't.
Exactly. So because there is no scriptural basis for it, but because God has not positively said that women can have the priesthood, we're not doing that. It's
Did God also? Anyway, carry on.
Yeah,
I know. Sorry, that's just so dumb.
So ultimately, like, the argument would come into is like every time that you have like somebody discussed in Scripture who is officiating in the priesthood, it's always a man.
Except Junia.
But why does that matter anyway? Like, even if we didn't have Junia, why does that matter? Like, it doesn't justify this ban. right?
Well, since it's to quote, oh man, what show was that? Oh, I think I've quoted this before. Big Mouth.
Mhm.
Thank you, Nick Kroll. You're a life-changing person. He said, some things are wrong, but if they're wrong long enough, then they're tradition, and that's
Mhm.
fine.
Mhm.
Like,
And yeah, so in the 1950s, when a woman's place is in the kitchen, this is a no-brainer, right? This is like, we don't even have to think about this. Women
right.
wouldn't be in the priesthood. But as we get into like, actually thinking about like the role that gender plays in society, and
That
like
women are people.
maybe women are actually people and we should be treating them as such.
Oh,
Novel idea, I know.
you silly penis owner, you.
Seriously. The like that whole principle just starts to kind of push at that, and now you have to really say like, no, women can't be in the priesthood for reasons, and now we have to start offering reasons why. There just isn't a basis. There
Yeah.
isn't anything that's actually given because nobody's really thought about it.
Yeah.
It's honestly the same thing with LGBT issues.
I was going to
That
say,
never
that
came
sounds
up.
familiar.
That never came up before, right? Nobody was really
Yeah.
thinking about that because homosexuality, like as a concept, did not exist as a construct. Heterosexuality didn't exist as a
Right.
construct until homosexuality existed, by the way, until like the 19th century.
Yeah.
And those ideas weren't even further understood until you get like Kinsey doing his research and all of that. And like,
You know what? You don't realize how recent this is.
It's so recent.
Yeah.
Like, it is remarkably recent. And so these things haven't come up. And so what we do, or what they're doing in these religious spaces, they're drawing from tradition. They're drawing from these ideas that are from a completely different paradigm, trying to shove them into this other view and say, this is why this is
Yeah.
important. And it's like, that's not what we're talking about anymore. We're talking about something completely different here. And essentially what you're saying by going to these other arguments is that your God has not spoken to you on this issue
At all.
And that is what this amounts to, is
Yeah.
that because the church cannot present a cogent and coherent argument for why women should not be in the priesthood, God has not spoken to them on it. And I think that says something.
It's the Christian equivalent of the devil made me do it. God hasn't told me
Honestly.
to yet.
Mm-hmm.
Wait,
Mormonism
not
loves
God.
that.
It's totally his fault. It's not my fault. I'm just a man taking orders. How often does that come up throughout
Mm-hmm.
the short amount of history we're discussing? So
It's interesting. It's interesting that in 20th century Mormonism, the church moves from being this like esoteric, like, hey, there are like Quakers on the moon, religion,
Yeah.
to this, if God does not specifically say that women can hold the priesthood, they can't hold the priesthood.
And
Like,
I mean,
and also we're gonna go from knowing exactly what causes homosexuality all the way to we don't know.
Magic. You know, and I promise I'm not trying to shit on the church. I'm really not. If they just didn't make it so easy, come on, guys.
Yeah. This issue, right? It doesn't
I'm not saying the church in general sucks or anything bad about Mormonism, Christianity, any vein of Mormonism, whether the RLDS or but on this, I know this is something that you can equate to. I thought I was wrong for so long.
Mm-hmm.
How dare some old man in Salt Lake decide that I'm wrong because I love what's on the inside and not the package that it comes in. Why does that guy, who honestly, if he wasn't Mormon, probably wouldn't ever see a vagina, but the fact that there are more women than men in the church, he got lucky. So I'm just saying, what gives him the right to tell me that I shouldn't also get to see a vagina if I want to?
Right. And
So sorry, like that got
and
real personal and vulnerable.
Just to tack on to exactly what you just said, his wife dies and he can't go like more than a year being single after she passes away. He has to marry somebody else.
Yep.
He can't be alone. And yet he expects LGBT people, he expects women who don't fit the mold to live alone for this life in some hope that there is an afterlife where what will happen? What is the beneficial consequence of all of this? Because what I'm taught in Mormonism is that if I were to be faithful, if I were to, basically repent of my sins, go back into the church, live in full faith and fellowship, do all the stuff, go to the temple, and be single and celibate my entire life, that the best thing I could hope for is to be made straight in the celestial kingdom and to have a wife given to me who I would not be attracted to in this life.
I was going to say.
That's the best thing I can hope for? Really? That's what you're offering? And you see how this doctrine, this pernicious idea is just so dumb. I don't have anything nicer to say about it other than
no, that's a solid word.
Dumb.
Yeah, it's a solid
word.
And shit, I hope my parents don't see this. So my family dynamic, my parents are divorced.
Mm-hmm.
Bio dad, he Southern Baptist, very Southern Baptist, also a Mason, which is interesting enough, because he knew a lot of the people that I grew up with in Grand Prairie due to the high number of Mormons also being Masons. So
I wonder what causes that.
I know. That's such a strange connection. We may need to look into that at some point. So
somewhere in Helaman.
That's his deal. And so then mom and stepdad are Mormon. We all joined at the same time. And I remember my stepdad telling me, I was, that kind of, I'm coming out, but I'm not coming out. I'm seeing,
testing the waters.
Yeah. Let's talk about my friend, Amy, who likes chicks. And I'm kind of testing the water. And my stepdad says to me, I don't think there's any problem at all with homosexuality. And I'm thinking, yes, I am loving where this conversation is going. Well, good thing, Dad, because if I got something to tell you. And then he goes, because if you have a mental illness, that's not your fault. And I was like, you know what? Maybe let's not have this conversation.
We've got some work to do.
Yeah. So, boy, howdy. Super glad I didn't just take a flying leap off of that cliff. But what the hell is so wrong with just caring about somebody? You're not, nobody, who is harmed in this scenario? But that's a much bigger issue for a much different podcast, but I'm just frustrated. But the church was a big part of my parents believing that way, because the point of my story, when we joined the church, really hope they aren't watching. So my stepdad enjoyed partying, as did my mom. I mean, we're not talking like all night long partiers, but I mean, they hung out and had, friends and had beers and whatever, and very laid back, very liberal. And I know. And I mean, I'm not saying it's a conspiracy theory that the church like changed their minds, but you can logic somebody into having a change in core beliefs, you know?
Mhm.
If they're
Mhm.
not on pretty steady footing with what their thoughts on a subject are, people are fairly malleable. That's why there's so many cult leaders, David Koresh and Jim
Mhm.
Jones and all the rest. When we joined the church, my parents were like, love is love, and there's nothing wrong with that. To going just a few years, and now it's a mental illness. Like,
Mhm.
that's not what my God would teach.
Mhm. Mhm.
So,
Yep. And it's there in the doctrine, though. I mean,
yeah,
not the doctrine per se. It's in the teachings. It's
right.
in miracle forgiveness, right? Like,
Yep.
yeah.
That was a
And
mind fuck when I read that in my budding, not really sure what my sexuality was.
mhm.
Mm.
But if you, especially as a woman, are allowed to express like your sexuality in a way that does not require a man, can you imagine the impact that would have on priesthood structure?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So let's talk about something that's even
So
easier to deal with.
I got super vulnerable there. So please, let's talk about anything else right now.
Yeah, let's talk about Heavenly Mother.
Yay! Loving this.
Okay, so there is very little that has been said about Heavenly Mother by leaders of the church. You've got the Gospel
Yeah.
Topics essay that deals with it, and that's largely it. Other than that, shows up in the hymn "Oh My Father," and in "Oh My
Oh, I
Father,"
forgot.
it is presented as a logical truism based off of like the doctrine that's already
Yeah.
present, right? So it's if I've got this, and if we've got all these other things, then it follows logically that I have a Heavenly
I
Mother.
totally forgot about that hymn, to be 100%
Uh,
honest with you.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, you can say it to the tune of Come Thou Fount. Anyway, complete side note. It's in the same
You
year.
can! Oh my
Yeah.
God. I had to think about that. I was like, wait a minute. Huh, you can.
Yep.
Awesome.
So this is honestly, I think, one of the coolest parts of Mormon theology. Like, absolutely fascinating part of Mormon theology. And it's one of these like ideas that rises up that could actually like restore like some of the older like more polytheistic views,
Yeah.
but also incorporating into this like post monotheism view that Brighamite Mormonism carries with it.
Yeah.
And instead she ends up being ignored, demeaned, disparaged. I mean, like, she isn't necessarily demeaned and disparaged in and of herself, but the
Right.
belief or the practice on the belief in her
Yeah.
is. And so you don't have this like powerful, like nigh omnipotent goddess figure who is the
Yeah.
mother of like our souls, the mother of our spirits. Instead, you have this silent, keep sweet, pray and obey type woman who is
Yeah.
basically just relegated into obscurity and silence.
She's
And
a
her children,
figurehead, but you
a,
don't,
a
a
figurehead you can never
figurehead without a
see.
figure. Right.
Right. And her children, are punished essentially for seeking to commune with her. And that might seem like a bit of a bold statement. Like, I'm not saying that you're going to be excommunicated if you pray to Heavenly Mother, but if you were to try to pray to Heavenly Mother in a sacrament meeting, do you think your microphone's going to stay on?
Oh, buddy.
And if you were to confess to praying to Heavenly Mother, there's a chance you could face informal church discipline for that. Again, you're not going to sit in a membership council for it. I'm not suggesting that you would.
Right.
But you could face some informal type
Yeah.
of
No
discipline for
sacrament
that
for a week or two.
until you stop that practice or those sorts of things, right? So this is Heavenly Mother represents exaltation for women.
Well,
This
that
is
just sounds like the funnest eternity I've ever heard of.
I really have to credit like Samantha Shelley and other
Yeah.
like women
Yes.
podcasters who have talked about this. It has helped me to understand this better. I wouldn't have understood this way without the influence of like smart women, confident women, powerful women who are really the embodiment of what Heavenly Mother should represent in Mormonism.
Do you mean
And
heathens? We
I
don't talk
know,
about those
heathens.
kind of women.
But yeah, this Heavenly Mother is the promised blessing of exaltation for women in Mormonism.
I had a friend. She has since passed, so I won't say her name because she still has a lot of friends and family. But I grew up with her in Grand Prairie, and she was the woman I wanted to be. She was a single woman in her 50s, powerful. If I had to say who she reminds me of the most, it's going to be B. Arthur on Golden Girls. 100%. Like that is her. And we were talking one time because, as all good Mormon girls do, I got married right out of high school to a man I didn't love because it's what was expected. And my then marriage was ending because it never should have happened in the first place. And I was talking with her and I said, well, I failed as a woman. Like, I was a failure in my eyes. And I asked her, I said, does it bother you? Because she had not ever married. I said, does it bother you? Basically, and God, how effing embarrassing is it to think back on this? I was like, does it bother you that you didn't ever fulfill your purpose? You didn't get to have kids. You didn't get to be married. Like, do you regret that? And at the time, this was the most wonderful solution because she said, well, actually, I talked to the church leaders about that. My husband has already passed. He lived at a time different than me, and he has since passed away before I ever even came to earth. And when I pass, he'll be waiting for me so we can both go to the celestial kingdom together. And I was like, well, that's just a god dang Disney movie. I love everything about that. Yes, please. That's exactly what a great story. And now I'm just like, so she can't go to heaven because she doesn't have a husband. So we have to go find her some dead dude just so that she gets to go hang with God in the afterlife that she wouldn't be worthy to go into without dead husband in the first place. Well, that just sounds amazing. And I don't know why more people aren't doing it.
Poke it and prod it. Poke it and prod it when it comes to these doctrines, and it becomes very clear what the where it's weak and where it's vulnerable. And yeah, like, I find these ideas interesting on the surface level. They're fascinating. It's definitely better than the the standard Christian dichotomy of believe in Jesus or burn forever. But
that was always a fun one too.
But it's not a high bar to clear.
Which religious trauma do I want?
Right.
There's so many to choose from.
Right.
God bless America. Jesus.
Seriously. So here's the thing that's come in this last week, right? Is the comments from Annette Dennis in the Relief Society saying that there is no other religious organization in the world that I know of that has so broadly given power and authority to women.
Girl needs to get out more.
So just to name a few, I put it in the slides here. You've got the Oracle of Delphi. You've got Astra in, and these are some older traditions. You got Wicca in the modern age, which is like, if you're a man, you're the one that's relegated into the side corner of not being able to do the stuff.
You don't get to play in our sandbox with magic and shit.
You can bake the cookies for her. But a woman's going to have to, speak at the end of your meetings,
Right.
Wicca's fun.
I love it.
And then you've got Community of Christ, which is part of the Mormon tradition,
Yeah.
Though they wouldn't use the term to describe themselves, it is part of the tradition. And their impending appointment of Stacey D. Cram, who's currently in the first presidency, to being the president of the church here in the coming years.
I called them. I called and talked to them
Yeah.
after you and I had that conversation. The bishop equivalent for the Community of Christ Church I'm just telling you people all my personal stuff. Cool. If you want to stalk me, just don't murder me. In Grand Prairie, where I grew up, is a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so happy.
Yeah, no, very common for leaders in Community of Christ to be women. And I think when we looked at it before, it was like at least half, if not a little bit more than half, of their general leadership is women.
That's right. That's right. We were talking about that.
Yeah, and there's some actual like racial diversity as well in that. So yeah, they're kind of doing Mormonism in a way where it's like we're going to take the same scriptures, generally speaking. Stands the Pro of Great Price in a few sections of the Doctrine and Covenants that are present in the LDS tradition.
And miss that.
Yeah. And what we're going to do with that is create a religion that is egalitarian, that is, working towards being affirming of LGBT people. They still got some work to do, but they are leaps and bounds ahead of Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Yeah. Anyway, so you've got these other religions that are doing it. So really, really no other religious organization that you know of, get out more. And
sorry, I'm not seizuring.
My
dog was gonna knock Johnny Depp over. He's not actual Johnny. I've got a figurine of Johnny Depp, and the dog was about to knock him over, and he's ceramic, and I didn't want him to break.
That would have made for a very dramatic moment.
Johnny Depp has been through enough lately, people. Let's just let the man sit there on my shelf.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're trying to teach us stuff, and I'm not helping.
I'm trying to teach us stuff.
Sorry, I'm not helping. Carry on.
So the LDS Church is really interesting. When we talked about this at the beginning, you have this history of these sister wives really being at like the leading edge for the time of gender issues and being enfranchised and really like kind of leading the way in a positive direction for women's rights in the country. But through a fear of communism, a fear of LGBTQ people, and really just simple equality between the genders, this has led to a church that is stagnant and regressive on gender issues. And I want to point out kind of a logical fallacy here that I think is worth exploring. Not a logical fallacy, a reasoning fallacy in the church. And so if you recall with the Family Proclamation, it states that gender is an essential characteristic of eternal identity, right? And so Dallin Oaks has clarified that refers to gender assigned at birth. And so if I don't know what that. So there's a problem already once you have intersex people like existing.
I was gonna say, I see like 5 things right now that's just not gonna work. Correct me if I'm wrong. Aren't one of the apostles? They have a transgender child. They have a homosexual
One of the apostles
child?
has a gay son. Yeah.
So, okay, there it is.
Yeah. So Elder Gong's son is gay. And
do we not talk about him like?
Oh no, he's actually a pretty prominent figure in like kind of the post-Mormon or progressive Mormon space. But Elder Gong has done
active?
I don't believe so. And Elder Gong has done quite a bit to not so much to distance himself per se from his son, at least in public spaces, but to distance himself from his son's LGBT identity in
his
public
sins.
Spaces.
Got it.
Right.
Okay. Super helpful.
There are some issues there, and I don't want to dive into stuff that I'm not otherwise too terribly educated on.
You're totally fine. I just wanted to remember correctly.
Yeah. His son Matthew, like I said, is a pretty prominent figure in this space, and so go to his stuff. And speaking to folks broadly,
he's a content creator.
I don't know if he's necessarily a content creator, but he has like influence in social media.
Got it. That's okay. So we're same page.
I don't
Okay,
know. I don't
interesting.
know that I want to call him an influencer, but he has influence in social media.
Okay. I can co-sign on that. I'd
Yeah.
be interested.
So where was I?
Sorry, I'm gonna mute me. Go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. Where was I? Thank you.
We were talking about the progressive ideas and the last one.
Oh, sorry, that's what it was. Okay, so you have gender as an essential characteristic, right, assigned at birth, and that is a part of your eternal identity. That's where I was. Okay, so here's the reasoning, the fallacious reasoning that arises from that. So if that's the case, then a gay trans man born outside of the church, who goes through transition, is still recognized by the church as a woman. Now, that is not a position that I agree with. I think it is horribly wrong, horribly transphobic, and pretty reprehensible. But Dallin Oaks would say that a gay trans man is a woman. Now, if a cisgender gay man born in the church were to marry a gay trans man at any amount or level of desired transition and all of that, whether pure social transition or having some amount of medical transition in place, the gay man, a gay cisgender LDS man were to marry a gay trans man, would he be living in sin? Would he be able to officiate in the priesthood? Would he be able to? And the answer to this question, if you're following the doctrine, is necessarily yes. However, he is distinctly living a gay lifestyle. So you're running into a problem here because of your bigotry on both points, Dallin Oaks.
I'm
frankly.
like, well, that just.
And if this is out of left field, if you think this is out of left field, it's not. There are people who are actually going through this.
It's not. And that's the thing.
When I brought this up in Mormons Building Bridges, there was at least one person who was like, I have a child who is doing exactly this.
Really? And
the bishop was basically allowing them to function normally in the church.
Okay, so we're totally, and the spouse was a transgender male presenting as such.
And I think I don't know. I'm not even going to presume to know what level of like medical transition was in place. But
right. But they're not forcing him or dead naming him.
Right.
Wow.
And you can transition outside of the church and then be baptized with approval. You can do all of that. There was just recently a transgender woman who was baptized into the church with her proper pronouns and name in her
really
record. Yeah, because if you transition outside of the church, it can't be treated as a sin. Like you can't say that like you were doing something like against a covenant or anything like that. So
theoretically, let's say I were transgender.
Mm-hmm.
I could ask my name to be stricken from the records, remove my stuff, leave by I am not LDS anymore at all, transition, come back, be baptized as what would be my true self and be treated as such.
You would in that situation, it probably wouldn't happen because you would have had a previously existing record and all of that.
Could I?
If you were to completely disappear from the grid, basically, and then
I was
come
like,
back
could
with a
I
completely
move to
different name?
Montana.
With first, you would need first presidency approval, I believe, if you've done any sort of like actual like medical transition. If you've just done social transition, I think it's just the mission president that needs to approve it.
Really? Wow.
I don't remember the level, but with once medical transition is in place, it goes up to the first presidency for sure at that point. But they've approved it in certain instances.
That's amazing.
So this is not entirely like this is an unreasonable scenario, and because it is a perfectly reasonable scenario,
I feel like we shouldn't be celebrating the church on doing the abso-fucking-lutely bare minimum. So it's like,
And
we're like,
and not
oh,
even
good
really
job,
wrestling with the
church.
implications as
Yeah.
well, right? Like what this
Like, oh, good
this
job, church. You were
indicates.
nice to the gays for a
Yep.
minute. Let's celebrate you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's got some issues, I think. And because so for the transgender person, actually I don't see like any real issue per se. But for the gay cisgender person, there should be a problem because you are doing something that is explicitly in a direction of basically of a gay lifestyle, as they would say. And because you're doing that, either you have to say that it's fine because your partner is like is actually a woman, and so
Right,
like
not
it's
really
fine.
a man. Yeah.
In the which case, like we could get into a whole thing about like how
Super healthy marriage.
how genitals play in and all that, and like how like your presentation as like like what you're presenting matters. And if it's if the issue is then that it's actually a problem because you are in fact living a lifestyle that is gay facing, then you're affirming the transgender person's identity and saying that you can actually legitimately transition genders even within the Mormon paradigm.
No muddy water there at all.
Yeah.
And you were saying not theoretically, but by the letter of the law, you could have a temple recommend. Under the chastity laws, basically.
Oh yeah, so the way that the law of chastity
I'm just
covenant
saying
is in the temple,
their
that's
rules are.
Mhm.
There's a lot of holes there. I mean, I'm
There
just saying in general.
There are. And it's anytime that you actually put it under a stress test that you'll see these things start to come up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I can't say that I am a fan of the way that Mormonism handles gender. And this is, like I said, this is the thing that this was the thing that when I tried to put it on my shelf completely like broke apart, right?
Yeah.
It didn't just crash; it just exploded into a million pieces at this point. The initial cracks were things like, oh, I don't know that I really have a good basis for saying that Brigham Young was the rightful successor of Joseph Smith, and oh, this verse in the Book of Mormon is weird and seems to contradict other scriptures. That's strange.
Yeah.
Those were some of the cracks that I had. But the thing that broke it was this, because the church, something's wrong somewhere.
Yeah.
And I really have to give credit and thanks to my physiology teachers at BYU Idaho, who shared a 2020 special with Jazz Jennings, and then talked about like how to understand transgender identities and how to interact with transgender people. In such a way that it led me to start this process of really deconstructing the frankly bigoted views that I held thanks to Mormonism. And that really helped me to go in a direction of getting rid of those to the point that I got better.
I got better.
I got better. Yes.
She turned you into a newt.
Newt. Yeah.
Well, I want to say thanks to you because more vulnerability. Maybe I shouldn't eat banana cream pie. It makes me emotional.
At least it was a fruit pie.
So I want to say thank you to you because legitimately, I was at a crossroads, if you will, with my own trying to kind of navigate what I believed and spirituality, and it's Mormonism is not going to be, for anybody watching who is not familiar with Mormonism. Why are you watching, first off? But my next question is,
Thank you for being here.
I was gonna say, I'm super glad you're here, but like, I have questions. It's like during the finals, it's like 2:30 and you're learning how to play the spoons and you're like, I don't even own this instrument. It's sort of like that. If that's why you're here, welcome. How integrated and how much a part of our day-to-day life our religion is. We're not going to be your Catholic. I mean, no hate to the Catholics. I am just making friends and influencing people, who goes to church or mass only on Christmas, only on Easter, or many of my family members who are Southern Baptists, who I'm just pissing everybody off, who only go to church to gossip about this lady's sister who had a baby out of wedlock. Like, our religious experience is going to be vastly different from that, because our church experience, our religious experience and belief system truly integrates what we eat, what we wear, what we say, how we think. It is a part of our life that it influences every part of our life. And I've got a dear friend who she grew up in the Jehovah's Witness faith, and they have a very similar sort of situation there, where it is a life integrated religion. So I was terrified, because all of a sudden my nice, safe little Mormon life, which, I mean, this as well as anybody else, I have always been a bit of a, on the fringe of things with tattoos and cussing a lot and tattoos a lot. When I was really starting to deconstruct and try to figure out what I believed legitimately, and I'm not saying this was an answer to a prayer or that Heavenly Father made it happen, but I will say, you posted pretty quickly about, hey, I'm going to do this podcast. Does anybody want to do this with me? And I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'll do it. I'm interested, because I knew that you had already taken these steps and asked yourself these same questions that I was now at that point of asking myself. And I don't know if I would have been brave enough to take a lot of the steps I took without you. So,
Well,
thank you.
I'm glad to be a part of it. Thank you for doing this with me.
We
have a long way to go, so the sappy stuff is maybe a little too early here.
I know, I'm sorry, but
we've got like 9 months of this thing left.
I know. You and my husband, like, he's super Mormon still, but I'm working on it. No, but he is still very Mormon. He considers himself Mormon. He is an active LDS member. But throughout the whole process, he's still been like, that's my path. You got to figure what your path is, and I'm here to support you, baby. And I'm just like, oh, it feels like testimony meeting. So thank you for giving me permission to figure out what the hell I think. And the answer is, I don't know, but at least I feel safe exploring it with you. So thank you.
Well, thank you for joining me on this podcast. I think that I'm gonna watch this segue happen. Watch this. It's gonna be really good.
Okay, right.
I think that your husband is a great example of a man in a position where instead of trying to like kind of leverage power and authority to like put you in a certain place or things like that, he chooses to like allow you to explore that in a meaningful way. And so he's not really doing this thing with like benevolent patriarchy.
Boy, howdy.
It was great, right? It was great.
I'm so proud of you right now.
I deserve all of the commendations and medals for that transition.
You almost made me choke on my Anita Bryant cream pie. That sounded horrible. I don't want to eat that. My banana cream pie.
That is not a search term that anybody should use.
I will never. There is no woman lesbian enough to just. You carry on. I'm gonna mute myself.
Yeah, I could run down that rabbit hole, but I am not going to.
Nobody wants to be in that rabbit hole. Nobody.
I will ignore to the detriment of much humor. So it's funny, I'm trying to like kind of get back into this and you're just like losing it while still on mute over there. So it's like all right. So this whole like idea, this whole like regressionist or regressive view of gender within Mormonism is supported and upheld by a priesthood body of men who say things like, women are so fantastic, so wonderful, so perfect, so beautiful that they don't need the priesthood. This is what you were saying, back earlier on. And it comes back around here because it is a through line throughout all of this, that if a woman is doing something to support the patriarchy, and that means that she can have the right to vote because it supports the patriarchy, we're all for it. But when it doesn't, when it's ordained women that's coming up and saying, hey, maybe like we should be allowed to attend priesthood meeting too, then it's
silly
an issue.
women. Jesus
Right.
is for dudes.
So I mean, the whole thing sounds nice, right? Like it sounds nice to say like, women, you're so special, so wonderful, so already perfect, and God gave you all these wonderful characteristics. Men suck. Men are the worst. That's why they need the priesthood, because otherwise, like, what man would actually participate in Mormonism if he didn't have the priesthood? Because like men are the worst. And like this is horribly actually misogynistic.
That's why I need to collect
is,
wives like fucking Pokemon cards. Carry on.
This is just a very common rhetorical strategy, though, in groups that are trying to be like very patriarchal, that are trying to establish that patriarchy. We hear things that are similar in like very patriarchal evangelical groups, and groups that really promote like purity culture and modesty culture and those sorts of things. All these things are part of the same offshoot. And it's part of this like benevolent patriarchy trying to like be like, oh, we're, women, you're so great, and men just need the support. Otherwise, men will just suck and die and roll over in the ditch and will be completely useless. And so we need women to, do all this other stuff. Otherwise, men will just explode and spontaneously combust. It sounds like what it's doing is degrading men, but it's degrading men in order to subjugate women. And so, yeah, it's
that, kids, is what we call gaslighting.
Yeah, it's
That's
it's
the
bad.
word of the day.
It's bad. And I may just be Ken, but
I was just thinking of that song.
I was really thinking of the Barbie movie, and I was trying to like bring that in some other way, and I'm just gonna go for it.
Anywhere else I'd be a 10. Anyway, I'm not obsessed. What? I don't know every song by heart.
It's a great film, honestly. It's just fantastic.
Really is.
Yeah, it's just a silly. It's a silly way of trying to defend patriarchy, because if they were to say the quiet part out loud on it, it would be obviously like very bad. And that's what the role of the benevolent patriarchy actually serves. That's Mormonism. That's Mormonism.
I was going to say, there it is.
Yeah,
you said it.
And
that's
so,
accurate.
At the end of the day, maybe what the leaders of the church need is a proverbial taste of banana cream pie.
They can't have any of mine because I finished it.
No, yeah, mine's all gone too. Well,
I'm a woman, so I should rush into that kitchen and make us all some more.
I can't even joke about that at this point.
I don't know how to make banana cream pie, so I'm assuming there's I'm assuming there's bananas in it, but that's about as far.
And some kind of cream.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
So yeah, this is gender and Mormonism, and I would really love to see, you know, Brighamite Mormonism go the way of Community of Christ. I don't see it going in that direction anytime soon, though, because at present it wants to structure power, and it's interlocked these ideas of gender and LGBT issues so tightly together that to change the one will pretty much inevitably change the other.
It won't change until it affects the ledger numbers.
It already is, though, and I think that
not
that's what you mean is the money.
Yeah, but I mean,
and it never will.
Not to the point, right? Because they're so unimaginably wealthy. It would have to be a massive shift for them to care.
Yeah. Yep.
And there's enough people drinking the Kool-Aid that, I mean, Trump made it to office, so clearly there's just a outpouring of intelligence in the United States. So there's always going to be enough people agreeing with a stupid choice. I was speaking to a friend of mine, friend's a loose term. We were disagreeing about a very similar subject, and I said, Jesus, go look online. You've got to see how archaic your thought process is. And he said, I do go online. I can always find somebody who agrees with me. And I was like, you know what?
It's true.
Touche. You're right.
It's true. Yep. And that's, I mean, that's a whole other problem in which there are Netflix documentaries on that are actually pretty accurate and pretty good. Yeah, it's social media. It has been, I think we talked about this before, it has been one of the best blessings and one of the worst curses on modern civilization. And it's hard to recognize and accept that we've got the one without like just being terrified and afraid of the other.
Yeah. You know what? I wonder if he watches this podcast. I'm gonna quit talking about people I know.
I generally, try to keep that on the minimum in these places. Make really oblique references that.
Well,
unless they're like publicly facing.
If you do want to be called out on a podcast, you shouldn't be dumb. It's not my fault.
All right, Lolo. Thank you so much for
play stupid games. Get called out on podcasts.
Right. I think it's get stupid prizes, but yeah, maybe that is a stupid prize.
Well, thank you as well, Perry. I loved being able to be vulnerable with all of y'all.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. Happy again, Trans Day of Visibility, and I think there's some other thing going on, but we're not really worried about that today.
Was there something else going
on? Yeah, no.
I don't remember.
I think somebody's like selling chocolate for pretty cheap tomorrow, though.
You know what?
Tomorrow.
My brother calls it Zombie Jesus Day.
That is partially accurate.
There
are other zombies.
That's true. Oh, who else can we piss off today?
Let's get them all. Right. We'll see you next week when we get to piss off a whole bunch of other people and we go through Jacob 1 through 4. And,
oh God, yay!
Until then, toodles.
Bye.